Okay, this morning we're talking to Alastair Jessamine, so welcome, Alastair.
Thank you.
Could we maybe start right at the beginning? So where were you born, and where did you go to school, and how did you find your way to the ministry?
Well, I was born in 1949 in the village of Hill of Beath, near Cowdenbeath in Fife, a mining village. Very happy childhood. Attended Fulford, that's Foulford, a primary school, and then later Beath High School. I worked thereafter for 5 years or so in the civil service, and then I thereafter trained for the ministry. I think it was inevitable that I would consider the ministry as a profession, because I had been brought up from my earliest years in the church. I went through the various departments of Christian education, Sunday school, Bible class, the youth organisations of the church. So, as I say, it was inevitable that I would at least consider. So I had to think, well, have I got anything to say? I reflected, and I thought, well, the church has given me a good start in life. It has given me principles to try to live up to, standards to abide by, and I thought, this is what I will take to the selectors when I make application to be a candidate for the ministry. Surprisingly, I was accepted, and I then began my training at the University of Edinburgh. I did an arts degree, followed by a degree in theology, a total of 7 years. Thereafter, I spent a year as an assistant minister in Newland South Parish Church in Glasgow. Very, very happy year I spent there. And then the time came when I had to apply for charges, one of which was Straven Rankin and Chapelton parish churches. I'd never heard of them. So I got into the car and motored up through East Kilbride, out into the country. It got more and more idyllic as I travelled towards Chapelton. Came to the village, liked it, had a look round in the car, liked what I saw, then continued on to Straven, saw it nestling down as I approached, beautifully situated, came into the town, had a look round, and thought, yes, I'm going to apply for this charge. Then they responded, and one thing led to another. I was invited by the vacancy committee of the church to become the minister in succession to the Reverend James Gregg. So that was how I arrived in Straven and Chapelton.
And what year was that, Alastair?
That was 1979. I was ordained and inducted to the two churches in August of 1979. It wasn't yesterday. I was also, amazing, during that period, I was 12 years in Straven and Chapelton, and during that period also, I was chaplain to the then Dungaville prison, the former residence of the Dukes of Hamilton. It's now, I think, a clearing centre for immigrants and so on, but in those days it was a prison which really specialised in long-term prisoners coming to the end of their sentence. So they had to keep their noses clean. So chaplains in prisons like that had an easier time than serving in the real hard-line prisons like Berlin and Sorken. So again, another 12 happy years as chaplain to Dungaville. An idyllic charge that I was very vexed to leave, I may say, but my parents by this time were becoming very, very advanced in years. I'm an only child, so I decided I have to be nearer them, and I was then called to be the minister of Dunfermline Abbey, which is very close to Cowdenbeath, where my parents then were. And then as a retirement approached, I was 20 years in Dunfermline. When retirement approached, I decided, right, I'm going back to the West. So Eleanor, my wife, and I returned to Straven, and here we have been ever since. I'm now retired some 12 years. Idyllically happy in Straven.
Okay, So let's go back to Straven then. The Dunfermline part's fascinating, and we'll cover that later. But going back to Straven, you must have some good stories in Straven.
Well, one of my, I suppose, favourite stories, or connections rather, was with the then Springvale Hotel, diagonally across the road from my man's in Letham Road. The proprietors at the time were Adam and Marion Law. It's no longer a hotel, of course, but they were very, very good to me. I wasn't married at the time, and they very kindly said to me, "Now, you'll have to eat, so you'll come across to us each day, either for lunch or for your high tea." And I said, "That would be very nice indeed." And so I did, and it was a wonderful period of my life, and there were several permanent residents there in Springvale Hotel with whom I mingled during the lunch or the high tea, and latterly, in fact, a predecessor of mine in Rankin and Chapelton Churches, the Reverend John Hearn, came to be a resident in Springvale Hotel, and many a convivial evening, shall we say, we spent there. I would finish my visiting, maybe one day in the week, my evening visits, and then I would go across to Springvale to have a chat with John Hearn, and we reminisced about days in Straven. We compared notes, and it was a wonderful time. Sometimes Adam Law would join us, and it became even more convivial. Wonderful, wonderful memories of Straven.
Alistair, we mentioned earlier about your time in Dunfermline, your 20 years there. Maybe we could just go over a wee bit about your time at Dunfermline Abbey.
Well, the reason that this came about was that, as I remarked earlier, my mother and father were ageing, and really needed to be in here then. So anyway, the time came, I was called to be minister there. I'd actually a previous connection with Dunfermline Abbey, because during my training for the ministry, students for the ministry have to serve 2 attachments. In other words, you're working with a minister and being introduced to the work of the ministry. So I went during my training to Dunfermline Abbey. The minister then was the Reverend Stuart Macpherson, and he retired in 1970. No, that's rubbish. That'll have to be redone. He retired in 1990, and I left Straven and Chapelton to go to Dunfermline in 1991, the following year. A beautiful building, and very historic. Robert the Bruce, of course, the hero of the Scottish Wars of Independence, is interred there. His remains had been discovered previously in the old nave of the abbey. It was certainly a royal who had been buried. The skeleton was wrapped in a cloth of gold. There was various forensic investigations made, and it was determined that this was indeed Robert the Bruce. So he was reinterred with great ceremony below the pulpit of the Abbey Church. It's called the modern Abbey Church, but it's late 19th century. But it's the modern Abbey Church. It's a beautiful brass that surmounts, the tomb, and as I say, the pulpit is above. Great imagery. An earthly king is buried beneath the pulpit, where the word of the King of Kings is preached Sunday by Sunday. So my time in Dunfermline was also very, very happy. I had 20 years, as I say, and retired from there in 2011. And here I am in 2023. My old mother used to say, if you can get some early retirement, Alistair, be sure to take it, because you know, son, life is short and it's later than you think. She never spoke a truer word. So there we have it.
And when was Robert the Bruce reinterred in the church?
That was late. That was late 19th century. I'm trying to think when. I'd have to look at my records. That could be edited out.
It wasn't when you were there.
It wasn't when I was there.
So there must have been a few characters going through at the same time as you as well, part of the congregation.
Yes, well, I would say that there were more worthies and characters here in the West, because the West, well, as you know, is very, very different from the East. But there were more characters here. But in Dunfermline, I had a very, as I had here, a very supportive congregation, well-attended services, well-attended services in Rankin and Chapelton, and then subsequently in Dunfermline. So a different age, shall we say, than the fortunes of the Church of Scotland in the present day, where numbers are radically declining, sadly. I feel, in fact, that maybe I'm a bit of a dinosaur, shall we say, compared with a lot of my colleagues today. But again, the church has to change, and times change, issues change, and the church still has to address these issues.
I know that you're always happy to look at and highlight controversial issues. You won't step away from them. I think you did mention to me about one occasion where you did such a thing and you were applauded for it. Oh. Give us a brief one of that. Right.
Well, that was that pertained to a Christmas Eve watch night service in the Abbey in Dunfermline, and I can't recall the subject matter, but it was clearly something controversial, and people had their opinions and views on it. But I decided, right, I'm going to say a little by way of the church's response to this matter. And to my astonishment, when the sermon came to an end, the whole Abbey Church, and it was packed, erupted into applause. I may say that I have never had a like experience since.
You did mention there were some notable exceptions to the applause.
Yes. Well, there were some people in the congregation who had connections with the central administration, shall we say, of the church, whose countenance tended to fall, disapprovingly. But nevertheless, I preferred the applause.
That was excellent. Going back to Straven and your involvement with the church there, you obviously had a couple of organisations within the church that managed the day-to-day stuff. Perhaps you could go over some of the characters within that.
Yes, right, okay. Well, the two courts of the church at that time were the Kirk Session, which comprised of the elders, each of whom tended to have a district. They delivered church magazines and communion cards, etc., and sat and dealt with the administration of the church. Then there was the Congregational Board, which dealt more with the financial side of the business of the church. When I came to Straven, the session clerk was Bill Cormie, who served the church very well, as did his successor, Ken McDougall, as a session clerk. The presbytery elder at that time was John Ayton. He and his wife were very, very kind to me, as were so many in the town. I would go down to the Aytons every Thursday prior to communion, that would be 4 times a year, in the Church of Scotland, locally, and have a meal with them, sometimes accompanied by the Reverend John Heron, and also Arthur Wales, who was the roll keeper in the church prior to Jack Howe, whose son Robert is a member of the Straven Auld Cross Golfing Association, a wonderful body of individuals who meet every Monday and compete at times of the year for various trophies and awards. The Auld Cross I joined them in the heyday. The original Old Cross consisted of people like Andrew Wilson, the farmer, Adam Law. There were about 8 to 10 of them, and then they invited me to be a member. So I'm the only surviving member of that company of Cross. Others have joined over the years, but we're a good lot. As I say, we meet every Monday, and we meet for our annual general meeting, and then we have an evening with the spouses and partners, usually at Straven Golf Club. So a good lot.
So your celebrations at Straven Old Cross, when it's the birthday, you always meet in the bar afterwards, and whoever's birthday it is then buys the drinks. But that's not how it used to be. Originally, you must have done something different.
Yes, well, originally what we did, these original Cross, they would meet after the Monday golf at the Springvale Hotel. And I've mentioned the Springvale Hotel, and cards were actually presented to the birthday boy. And the Cross were encouraged, each of the Cross were encouraged to produce a poem, doggerel verse really, but a poem in relation to the birthday boy. And some of these poems were absolutely marvellous. I remember what Gordon McNay's card, I think it was Margaret McNay his wife, who used to compose the poem, but they were quite splendid. And the ones that Adam and Marion presented, I think Marion wrote a lot of them. I might be mistaken. If she's ever listening to this, she'll put me right. So that was what happened originally. But now, no longer any Springvale Hotel. We just simply meet in the clubhouse.
But in those days, there wasn't strong drink involved. Now, because today there is.
Yes.
When you go into the bar, you don't have a cup of coffee and a scone.
No, indeed no. Well, the birthday boy is responsible, of course, for buying the drinks. But strange enough, there are some who do have coffee, but not many. But not many. So it is, I suppose, a bit more convivial these days, but again, it's very limited. I mean, one drink you're supposed to buy, because probably you can drive home after one, because to watch that as well.
But it's a historical thing. I mean, the Crows have been going for a long time.
They have, yes. Now, I came in 1979 to Straven, and it was very shortly after that. It was the early 80s. The early 80s that they were formed. This was a bunch of elderly gentlemen who would go out and golf, and on one occasion a craw descended upon the golf ball of one of the party and flew away with it, and hence the Old Crows they came to be known as, and the title has stuck.
And as the current chairman of the Old Cross, is that continuation?
Yes.
Another interesting part is Robert Howe.
Correct.
Robert is, what's he, the president just now? What is he?
President, yes. Robert Howe is the president of the Old Cross, and he is the son of Jack Howe, whom I've previously mentioned, who was a roll keeper in Rankin Parish Church, as it was then, now Trinity. So the generations, that's a generational issue.
But his father was also a member of the Old Cross and a past president.
He was indeed. He was indeed. I'm trying to think if he was a past president. He was certainly a member of the Old Cross. I'm not sure if Jack was a president. My memory, you see, this is the advancing years. I don't have total recall on that one. But he was a very faithful Old Crow, and as he advanced in years, Jack would become quite irritated with his performance on the golf course, and would be seen to throw the golf club down in anger after a poor shot. Very amusing for the rest of us.
Okay. So another 7 minutes or so. So Alastair, we know that you were away for 20 years in Dunfermline. I think it'd be interesting for you to offer some observation on the changes that you recognise within the town. You were here from late 1970s up to the beginning of 1990s, and then you've got that gap of 20 years. You've come back. What do you think the differences are? Are there any differences between what you saw in the 80s to what you're seeing in the 2000s?
Well, strangely enough, I don't detect any radical difference in the town and community from the time I was here, the 12 years I was here, to the 30 years later, 30 years plus later. Now that's to the credit of the town, because there have been a lot of new people have come into the district in that time. But the essential character of the town has changed very little. As I say, it's to the town's credit. The shopkeepers, there's so many independent businesses. How many towns these days have a fishmonger? So many will say, we don't have a fishmonger. Straven has a fishmonger. Straven has an artisan bakers. Straven has as many coffee shops, many private businesses. Now, that's definitely to the town's credit. So, no, I don't see any radical difference. And the people who have come in to Straven and the district have immersed themselves in the community and so have continued that aspect of the town that makes it very unique. Even to the extent that people still come into the town for the day to shop and to experience its facilities. To its credit.
When you look at the events that happen in Straven, they've definitely grown over the years. And do you feel that that's still a relevant thing to the overall community? Do you think it still adds to that?
Oh, it must. Well, it must do. I certainly try to participate as much as I can in the various events in the town, but but recently there was the balloon festival. That's very, very popular in the area. My wife's Eleanor's out continuously taking photographs of the balloons as they pass over the cottages at Gallow Hill. So yes, it's unique. It's unique. The facilities that we have here and that people are prepared to associate themselves with.
That's interesting to see or hear that you feel that the community spirit within the town hasn't altered over these years, or perhaps it's been enhanced and perhaps even grown. I'm wondering on your reflections on the church, because you've obviously been away from Rankin for 20 years.
Yeah.
What's your observations on the changes over that period, and specifically to the Church of Scotland within Straven?
Well, I think that the ministry today can be divided into two different camps. I mean, there are still many traditional ministers who are providing traditional services, but a lot of the younger ministers who are coming in today tend to conduct a more, shall we say, upbeat ministry, which will appeal to many within the community. I mean, for instance, Avondale, I'm told, is very, very busy on a Sunday, whereas some of the other churches, like my previous church, it's a traditional ministry that's performed, that's exercised there. So yes, the church has changed. I'm probably regarded as a kind of dinosaur within the church now, but it suits me to be a dinosaur, because that is the ethos in which I was raised. And when I do conduct pulpit supply, from time to time, I don't seek pulpit supply, it's a very traditional service that I perform.
One of the things I remember of your time here was the watch night service, and it was generally your church that was jam-packed and people were queuing to get in.
Well, that's very true. Each year, the actual watch night service, the midnight hour, was either conducted in what was then Rankin Church, now Trinity, and Chapelton. If Christmas was brought in at Chapelton one year, it was brought in at Straven the following year. But there were still two services, and invariably, when I turned up to either of the churches, there was a great hubbub of chat and very, very upbeat, and just very, very busy and quite inspirational, quite honestly, to ministers. I don't know what the situation is at present in relation to Christmas Eve services, but certainly in those days it was very, very popular. I
think, again, my recollection of this was the main draw to Rankin on those evenings was Alastair Jessamine. It wasn't necessarily the fact that it was a watch night service.
Well, I don't know if it was Alastair Jessamine, but Alastair Jessamine never preached for any more than about 8 to 10 minutes, so maybe that was a draw in bringing people to the Christmas Eve services. And certainly the services at Christmas Eve were not long. They would start, for instance, maybe at 11:30, and I always had it wrapped up by about 10 past, 12:15 at the most. So the people, when they were coming, knew that it wasn't going to be a long, drawn-out affair.
I understand that, but I think your unique style was appealing and of interest to people who weren't necessarily churchgoers. And I think that Alastair Jessamine, your style and how you approach things and the way you introduce humour to things and make it fun, I think that was a big part of the appeal.
Well, you're very kind, but I have to say that these people who did come along to the watch night service, who weren't members of the church, weren't necessarily there the following Sunday at the services, but certainly it was giving them a hope, a positive aspect of the church, to consider. Who knows?
You're right, I understand that, but it's a way of bringing the community together in a very important time, and I'm not quite sure that desire to go along to a watch night service has the appeal nowadays as it had when you were there.
No, well, I suppose not, and plus the fact that people can, these services are all streamed nowadays as well. I mean, people can sit in the comfort of their home, and watch the service taking place. So that is an aspect of how things are today. But no, I don't. I think that it's true to say that fewer and fewer people will actually put themselves out to actually physically attend a watch night service.
Do you not feel though that you have a unique way of presenting things, and I think that was part of your major appeal, and probably still is, Alastair?
Well, I think I'm a very different animal as a minister from a lot of the ministers today. I often say to people, I have never been like other ministers, and that's a fact. I do take a very kind of different approach, but I can't say that I don't want to be in high demand, but in retirement I've never been in high demand because the church has changed, and I can't offer people what I offer. Well, I can still offer them it, but whether they're prepared to accept it is a different matter, because I often go down controversial paths if it takes my fancy.
Do you not think that perhaps, though, that's the reason why you're getting a diminishing congregations within certain churches?
It's hard to say in a way. I mean, the rot set in a way back in the 1960s. I mean, I went to Sunday school in the 50s, and then I could watch the rot setting in, you know, flower power, you know, permissive society, do what you like, and that has continued right up, you know, to the present day. So the church, in a way, was destined, you know, to become not as popular as it once was. But who knows? It may go full circle. I hope so.
I think it's about community, though, isn't it? And you sometimes feel that the Church of Scotland specifically are more interested in the congregation rather than the wider community. And I think that's perhaps one of their downfalls.
You have to explain that. Interested in the congregation. Well, interested in the congregation's money, perhaps. You edit that out.
Yeah, we'll perhaps cut that bit. I think when you look at some of the newer churches,
right,
like the Evangelical Church,
yes,
and the Outreach Church,
yes,
they have a wider appeal. They're not just specifically interested in your adoption and adherence to Christianity. They're
right,
interested, that's part of it, that's their core.
yes.
But their wider interest is a community, people who are within the community but not part of the congregation.
I think they're perhaps more comfortable in that kind of church, you know, that when the praise bands, for instance, there's the advent of praise bands in a lot of churches, which will inevitably appeal to a lot of people. I mean, people on the golf course who attend some of these churches will tell me that they're really quite busy, and I'm very pleased that they're busy. But I think ministers like me are products of our age. We're products that the age we live in, that we've grown up in, and I certainly couldn't provide the type of service that some ministers are providing today. So you've been very kind to me, but I don't think I'm exactly, you know, churches aren't desperate necessarily to have me back.
So you're 20 years in Dunfermline. Although you were 20 years living in Dunfermline, a fair portion of that you acquired a property in Straven to actually maintain your connection with Straven as a community and your pals in Straven. So just talk us through that bit.
Well, when Eleanor and I went to Dunfermline, I was very conscious that I would have to acquire a property eventually to retire to, because once I was retired, I would be ejected from the manse and would have to live elsewhere. So with the pair of us thought, where could we go to live in retirement? It became evident that it would be far better to retire to the west, because Eleanor's family were all here. I was an only child. I only had a few cousins over in Fife. So we looked around for a property, and eventually a cottage came up for sale at Gallow Hill. These cottages, quite interesting, these cottages were really built adjacent to a nursing home, and the idea was that you were meant to start your old age or your retirement in the cottage, and then you would slowly gravitate towards the care home. That was the plan. But eventually the cottages came up for sale, and Mary Wood, who was the governor at Dungaville Prison at that time, stayed in this particular cottage during the week. She always said it was the only cottage, the only property that she was ever vexed to leave and to sell. So she sold it to us. And I may say that the General Assembly, one of the few things that the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland got right was that ministers should have 2 days off a week like anybody else. Well, I soon took advantage of that, and the plan became that Eleanor and I would leave Dunfermline on a Sunday night, we would come through to Straven, and we would spend Monday and Tuesday there. I would golf and she would go and do some retail therapy, her favourite, shopping, and then we would return on the Tuesday night. Some of the more unkind people at Dunfermline said, well, we now have a part-time minister, but it was all above board. That the General Assembly had approved it and we made use of it. So the association with Straven continued in the sense that the connection every week would be through, and it was great. But the time then came to retire, and we just moved all our goods and chattels from the manse in Dunfermline to the cottage in Straven. During my retirement, I'm very contented at heart. I don't do very much, quite honestly. I'll do the occasional pulpit supply and help churches out that have the ministers unwell or on holiday. I'll do some supply. I play golf maybe twice, 3 times a week, but otherwise I just potter about. To keep the old grey cells going, I often prepare short homilies, short sermons to be used regarding current affairs, to be used if I'm called out to take a service. I've informed the presbytery clerk that if a minister falls ill, even on a Saturday night, phone me and I'll come out and conduct the service. But apart from that, my wife and I are quite content to just go on staycations, as they're now called, go away for 2 or 3 nights at a time in some upmarket hotels and cottages, etc. And a great life, really quite idyllic.
And you still find Straven to be conducive with your retirement?
No question about it. Wouldn't want to live anywhere else. It was said that the wise men came out of the east, but as somebody said to me, but they found what they were looking for in the west.
That's excellent. That's a lovely conclusion.
That's not bad. Finish.
That's a very